Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Look, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. So here we are for part 3 of our webinar series around managing variance within the development lifecycle. For those of you who haven't joined before, I'm Carl Mulcahy from Persistent Systems, back to be your beloved host today. So before we get going, I must mention a few things in terms of housekeeping. So if you've not noticed already, all participants will be on mute throughout the webinar. You can submit questions via the chat window. Hopefully you can all see that. But if you are submitting questions, please address that to all panelists so we can try and pick that up throughout or take it away to answer at the end. We can unmute you if you wish to elaborate on your question, but please note we are recording this for those who aren't able to attend today. So if you do not wish for your voice to be recorded, then again feel free to use the chat window, and furthermore, if you do not agree to the recording, then feel free to leave the webinar at any point. The recording will be sent out in due course, and alongside with a link to the next webinar in the series, so we've got coming up. And you can find the wider schedule in the slide as well, Matt. I think we've got that in the next slide, haven't we? Yeah, thank you. Of course, following on from previous webinars, we've discussed the importance of, requirements management solution, especially, of course, one with added artificial intelligence built into it, with Watson being added into Doors Next. So those who obviously didn't attend the previous sessions, Doors Next is part of the Engineering Lifecycle Management solution from IBM, and Persistent now develop that on IBM's behalf. So we are, we call ourselves experts using the technologies, we develop it, we use it ourselves, and obviously know the technology very well. So Doors Next is obviously a robust requirements management solution which can easily transition into workflow and test management, given end-to-end traceability, and arguably a superior way to manage requirements. So just a slight synopsis on today's topic with managing variance. To me, it's a very interesting topic and something that is cropping up a lot more with customers in terms of my discussions. With so many products and systems on offer today, with various sort of subcomponents, subsystems, etc. I guess the challenge is for engineering teams to be able to reuse all these requirements efficiently, and knowing, especially when something has changed, and what impact these changes can have across projects and across variants. So yeah, we're very excited today to present how Doors Next can help address some of these challenges. It's a very powerful capability that was recently introduced, and without not trying to steal Matt's thunder, something that's not just being used within requirements but across the wider development life cycle too. So yeah, with that, I guess, sit back, make yourselves comfortable, and I can hand over to Matt to take us through the content.
Thanks, Carl. So as Carl said, this is kind of the third webinar in this series, and this is really one of the most exciting and well requested pieces of functionality that we've had from speaking to customers over the last few years. So this really will kind of go into the background on why the capability exists, and then also a very brief demo just to kind of show how it all hangs together from a kind of managing variance point of view. So again, the future webinars that are on coming up around industry compliance in a couple of weeks, and validating requirements and delivering those requirements, do feel free to register for those. The recordings do get posted, so if you are away on vacation over the next few weeks, I know it's the summer holidays in the UK, then you will still get notified, and you can see the recording. But today's topic, managing requirements variance, this is one of the kind of core pieces of functionality that sits within our toolkit now. So this is again a slide taken from the first webinar that we delivered, looking at good requirement fundamentals here, tracking granular requirements, constant attributes and metadata that are common across everyone that's using the tools, tracking hierarchy and traceability, and obviously last week we looked at artificial intelligence and how that has been introduced, but this session really is focusing on this kind of configuration management element that sits within the tools. So Carl's already alluded to this ever so slightly, but companies today producing physical products or potentially developing software, the complexity in these products is getting greater and greater, and the number of different components that sit within those are increasing as well. So companies need a better way of managing, tens, hundreds, potentially thousands of different product variants that exist within their portfolios for what they're producing in a better way than just doing things manually. And that's kind of where this capability has come from. What we'll find as well is, particularly within the physical world, like the cards we've got on the screen here, there's lots of shared components that exist within those across different variants or different products that get produced, where we might see the same engine is used in 5 or 6 different cars. We don't want to have to reinvent the wheel, start everything from scratch if we just want to make some changes to that. So we want to be able to leverage what we've already done, recreate it in a sense, and work on it in its own little area. But then we also want to make sure that it's kind of referred back to, and we can still see differences and merge changes as we need to. So, a product may have 80% commonality between its brothers or siblings products that exist, but that 20% difference, we want to be able to manage and change that so it's relevant for the product we're trying to produce, but without having to go through and go through it all the 100% and recreate everything. So we're trying to do that in as small as possible way as possible. So the way companies do this today, and this has been a problem that's been around for quite a while, is copy and pasting or cloning of owning. So if you've got a document in Word or Excel or something like that, what would happen is we would copy that document, paste it, give it a new name, and then start to make changes into that new document to reflect the new product that we wanted to produce. The big problem with that is obviously once we've done that duplication, once we've cloned it, we've lost the link, in a sense, back to the original where it's come from, unless we track it manually with some sort of reference or change log. So, it loses contact from where it's come from originally. Once we make those changes again into the new version that we've just copied, it's a manual effort to go through and see what those differences are that exist between the 2 different versions. We've got to manually read through, or even if we've got it in a tool and we've kind of duplicated the information within a tool, it's a manual approach to go through, read through them side by side to see what is different, what's common, what's changed, what's been removed. Which takes time, and all these kind of things that a human needs to do. They're always prone to a little bit of error, where we might see things missed, and we need to potentially fix that further down the line. Another problem with this is obviously if we do make a change in one of the versions that we've got, we then need to, if we do want to make that a common thing, it's again a manual approach for us to go back, find what existed previously and make that change again, which is manual effort. We need to type it in or potentially copy and paste data between different spreadsheets or different areas of a tool, depending on how we're tracking our requirements. So, it's kind of, this is what's been done in the industry today. It can be assisted with certain scripts and things if you are using a tool, but it's still a very error-prone and a very manual, time-consuming thing to have to deal with. So that's where variant management came in from our IBM toolkit. And effectively what we're trying to do is to make strategic reuse the norm. So you can have components defined with different versions that exist for those that we can branch, or stream will be the term that we use to create a new version of it. But because we're doing it in a tool that can track it, we have that link back to the original where it's come from. We see the origin, therefore the system can then flag changes to us very easily. And if we do want to propagate a change in a common area to multiple different versions, it's much easier to do that because we have those links stored under the covers that mean we can make everything as one, or just move a particular change where it needs to be done. Again, components is something we've used, a term I've mentioned quite a bit, and this is all around trying to break our system or products or software, whatever it is, into logical components that are then reusable building blocks, a bit like Lego, where we can say, right, we can take X, Y, and Z components, assemble those with their different variants, and that's our end product that we're producing, which is, end product variants, ABC or whatever it might be. And we'll see this walk through in a little bit of detail in the following on slides and in the demo as well. So variant management or version management is a very, very common thing that's been done for decades now in the software industry. So these kind of diagrams that we're looking at here, where we've got a base set of requirements that get branched into a couple of different versions, this has been going on for a very long time with managing versions of files. So effectively what IBM has done is, this is what we've the same kind of technology, the core concept is what we've applied to the wider engineering lifecycle to cover things like requirements, development of source code as well is included, but it kind of always worked, that way, the way software engineering was defined. We've added it as well for testing and managing versions of model elements if we're doing things like system modeling, and applied those techniques to the wider engineering domain. So if we look at this diagram here, what we've got, this core set of requirements at the top, which we can baseline at relevant stages of the project when we see fit, version 1, version 1.1, 1.2, and then we can start to branch those off into different versions. So if we think back to my comment earlier when I said, 80% of a car's requirements might be exactly the same between a family hatchback and an SUV, we can branch those off, track the differences, that 20% differently, so we can see that. We don't have to recreate the 80% that already exists for us, and then we can obviously move changes around from different versions or variants if we want to, as well as do those comparisons to highlight what differences have been created. So the examples we'll walk through today are around the automotive domain. We kind of chose that one because it's a fairly common area that most people should hopefully have relevance in. They either drive, own a car, or have bought a car. So understand that cars are built up by components that get shared by multiple different models that get produced from a manufacturer. But these techniques can be applied to other kind of product-based domains, electronics, aerospace, defense, or even in the software world. You may have websites that are slightly different based on geography or how someone logs in. How do we track the source code in line with the requirements and tests that need to be run for that particular variant of a website? So these kind of things can be applied to not just the systems engineering kind of physical product domain. This is just an example that we kind of use because hopefully it's clear for everyone. So what we can do with a component-based structure, if we define our system into multiple components, is it gives us a level of isolation as well as the ability to combine them, and we'll see that in the next two slides. But here I've got, again, some example components that would exist within a car. We've got an ECU that controls the engine, some driver assistance systems for things like cruise control, the engine, what radio kind of infotainment is available in the car that we've got, and then the overall vehicle that we're building from that exists as a component. And that then allows us to track the different versions or variants for each of those components individually. So over here on the right-hand side where it's been called out, in our fictional car company, we've got two different versions of the adaptive, the driver assistance systems, a basic and a premium version. They will share requirements and tests and source code, but there will be differences that exist between them. Whereas if we look at the engine, automotive manufacturers may have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I don't know, potentially more than that, different engines that exist within their lineup. So it enables us to track each of these components in as many different versions as we want to, because we've defined these components at the start of the project. Once we've defined those components, created the versions that need to exist for those components, we can then start to assemble products or systems or whatever it might be with this kind of hierarchical view of our end product. So what we can see here is, again, the automotive example. We've got a very basic family hatchback here on the left-hand side, which uses basic adaptive cruise control, the economy petrol engine, and a basic infotainment system. Whereas on the right-hand side, we've got an executive saloon slightly higher up the order list at the automotive company, which has got more advanced driver assistance systems, the premium infotainment, and a diesel engine because they're doing lots of miles up the motorway going to see customers. So the same core components exist between a basic family hatchback and an executive saloon. There may be differences where you have extra components in your more premium variants, but in this simple example, we've got the same core set with different versions. So what this allows us to do then is almost like pick and mix or build with Lego blocks to say, right, we're going to produce a high-performance executive saloon. We can branch off what we've got on the right and replace the diesel economy engine with a high-performance one for this particular variant. So we've not had to reinvent the wheel. We're still using all the same premium driver assistance systems and infotainment that exist, but we've swapped out the engine. And that's what allows us to do this, defining things into different components at an overall system level. What we've got here is a kind of a side-by-side comparison that we'll look at in the system in the demo shortly. But, you know, here's a requirement spec that we would normally see in something like Word or a tool like IBM Doors Next if you are using a tool for our premium and basic adaptive cruise control driver assistance systems. So we get this nice annotated view showing us on the left-hand side that here what this document looks like, and on the right-hand side here are the differences, and they're all highlighted for us. So here was what I was talking about. We can see these very easily, highlight the differences so I can see exactly what is different between these two different versions and variants. So I understand what the differences are, and then these changes can be merged back if I need to do that as well. So we'll see this in a bit more detail in the demo, but I kind of wanted to include a nice slide that shows the side-by-side views that we do get. The system is obviously tracking the ID numbers under the covers, so we know the requirement is the same, but it has a different version in a different context, and that gets highlighted for us here. And obviously, we've talked quite a lot around physical products and automotive cars, and aerospace and defense is one of the key areas that we see a lot of interest in this particular technology. But what we'll see here is that, you know, a company that makes a physical product will use something like a RALM toolkit to manage requirements in Doors Next. System models will be done in a tool like Rhapsody, and we'll track projects and defects and task allocation in a tool like RTC and do all the testing in a nice combined end-to-end solution. And that's kind of in an ideal world. Software companies can obviously use that for their software domains, but, you know, in the physical world, they'll use that as well as something like a PLM, Product Lifecycle Management System, which then tracks the physical side. So if we imagine the left-hand side here is our conceptual or our logical definition of systems, PLM tracks the physical side, where you would see things like bill of materials, product structures, part numbers stored for the physical product that's being created. They'll also track things like problem reports and enterprise change requests within that PLM system for the physical side. And, you know, with a system like this, we can track requirements in Doors Next and track those through to test and run tests against those to make sure everything's passed. And once we've proven out that version managed element, that can get shared into the PLM side, where if we have a loose integration, if it's just two separate siloed tools, there'll be exports to populate the bill of material and the parts that are created. And then once it has been, you know, pushed out to market, we'll start to see things like change requests come back and problem records that get created. But obviously, from a physical point of view, a product that's been produced, that has, you know, reference and relevance back into our engineering domain, where we're tracking things like requirements and tests. So a textual link will need to exist that, you know, shows the references back to the requirements that maybe need to change from that problem that's been found. And that can be a very manual approach for companies that use this sort of PLM tool as well. So in an ideal world, we can have an integrated situation with ALM tools like the IBM Rational Toolkit and PLM tools. There's multiple ones in the market can be integrated. There are numerous integrations that exist for this kind of PLM domain. Custom ones are also being built by Persistent for use in the market, but the whole linking back to version management and tracking that as a whole, you know, these elements that exist from the diagram we were just looking at have versions. You know, this particular car or this aeroplane or this coffee machine or whatever it might be, these are versioned artifacts in this new world where we're tracking variant management. PLM artifacts are also version management, so it's something to be aware of and something to bear in mind that, in an ideal integration, if we do turn on this version management capabilities within the Rational Toolkit, we want to be able to do the same thing for the PLM systems that we may want to trace to as well. So this is an area that Persistent's very active in, and we're investing a lot in, working with a couple of companies in the UK and around the globe to set this up. But just because you use a PLM tool shouldn't mean that you shouldn't be able to have this whole version managed landscape of the logical and the physical engineering of your artifacts. So something to bear in mind. I know there's lots of kind of customers on the call that the PLM side may be relevant to, but just wanted to highlight that's something that isn't lost by moving to a version management domain. So at that point, that was kind of the introduction I wanted to run through. I think it's worth jumping into the demo now just to show a few use cases on how this all works. Carl, I think I did see a question pop in as I was running through that, so I'm not sure if it's worth covering that off now or later.
I was just about to say the same thing, yes. So we've got a question from Andrew. Is it possible to share requirements or artifacts between components in DNG? I don't know if you can answer that now or if it's better to park that for the demo or later on.
Yes, so the answer in short is yes. The kind of the type system or the configuration of the component, because if we've got multiple components, they may have different ways of tracking requirements. As long as they are the same, which is kind of something we would advise to help you have a common way of working, as we talked about in the first webinar, then yes, you can move and merge requirements between different components pretty easily, just within the tool.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Andrew, if that doesn't answer your question or if you have a follow-up, then please let us know.
So I've switched into our tool now to have a look at this in practice, and I've got one of our example projects here that, again, is the automotive one that we were looking at in the slides. And once we've turned on the global configuration capability within the tools, we have the option to create and manage our components. So here I've got multiple components defined for things like the adaptive cruise control, the ECU, the engine, infotainment, etc. So we have this extra screen that allows us to have a look at these different components in isolation. So if I open up my adaptive cruise control system here, what we'll see, for those of you that are familiar with Doors Next, this is just our standard kind of user interface for a requirements project, but we get this menu item in the top right hand of the screen here, which gives us our access to the version management actions. So things like creating a new branch or a new variant. How do I create a baseline? What if I want to do a comparison? Or what if I want to move changes between different versions that exist? This option is visible to you once you turn on global configurations, and that's something I guess I've not really alluded to so far, but yeah, this is available to be turned on in the system. So it's not turned on by default. You can turn it on if you want to use this in particular projects. And this will give you this menu item that we're looking at here. So what I can do from here as well is then switch. So if I want to move from the premium driver assistance systems as I am now into the basic, I can do that switch from here. And we get the same menu screen popping up to us as we would normally. All that's changed is this tag in the top right. However, if we look at the artifacts that we've got within here, all our standard navigation works exactly the same. If you want more details on Doors Next, then we covered that in the first webinar, so that recording is available. But we've got our standard folder structure, and we can open up one of our requirements modules, which is effectively a specification here, which has got some requirements in it, some diagrams, some headings, a bit of formatting, some views here on the left-hand side. So I can navigate this absolutely fine as normal. But what I can also then do is do a comparison from here. So the example we'll use is this driver assistance systems. I'll change or compare my basic to my premium. And it prompts us with this wizard. So again, it steps us through this step by step to say the configuration of the components that I mentioned for the question, nothing is different between these different versions, no extra attributes or, any attribute values have been added or removed since between these two different versions. The folder structure is exactly the same. Nothing has changed from that folder structure point of view. However, there's multiple changes between the different requirements that are in the project. So there's numerous windows here to show different things, but we'll start at the bottom one, which is basically telling us what exists in both different versions of this project or component, but it's different between them. So we'll open up the module that we were just looking at, and I can filter that from here to help find the ones that are relevant to me. And we get this nice side-by-side view that we saw in the slides we went through. And what we can do is turn on this synchronized scrolling option, which will then move us through the requirements at the same time to show us where things exist left and right. And over here on the left-hand side, we've got the basic adaptive crews that we were looking at. And over here on the right-hand side is the premium version. And you'll see that highlighted here are some blank requirements that exist in the premium that doesn't exist in the left-hand side basic cruise control. So basically the premium, the main difference is side-facing radar. So it's a bit more autonomous in terms of the way it allows the driver to drive the vehicle. It will keep you in lane. It will notify you if any cars are in your blind spot, that sort of stuff, which is common on quite a few new cars these days. So that's the big difference between the two. And we can see multiple changes within here, or we can focus in specifically on one of the requirements to say over here on the left-hand side we've got a 16-bit analog to digital converter, and on the right-hand side it's a 32-bit, and that's the difference between the basic and the premium. So we can drill down into individual requirements to see the differences, and it does highlight it very nicely for us to show these details, or we can look at this kind of document view and scroll through to see what the differences are. And there's more changes down here at the bottom to show what's different, but a nice highlighted view to show that. One of the questions we get asked a lot is what happens if we get a merge conflict type situation. So here we've got this changed in both situation, which is basically telling me that, for example, I've made a change to this requirement in the basic version. Carl has made a change to this requirement in the premium version. It's flagging me because concurrent changes have been made. That's not necessarily an issue unless we try to merge the two versions together. So if I tried to merge the basic with the premium, then it would flag that as an issue that we would need to manually resolve to say which of the versions do you want to keep, because we've got two separate edits that have been made. But for everything else, these changes down here, they will be able to be handled and made into one version if we wanted to do that. So merge conflicts are absolutely not an issue with this sort of tooling. What we can do here then is show you a change that we make that we want to be a common change. So again, I'm working in the basic version. So from an end user's point of view, an engineer that's working here, the only difference to me from my day-to-day is what version I need to be aware of, what version I want to be working in to make the changes to. Beyond that, the standard user kind of actions that you would go through should remain exactly the same. And we've got a requirement down here around the response time for something to be switched off. So we can pretend that we've got a test that has failed that we need to fix this. So what I'm going to do is I can make that change, but first I'm going to encapsulate this in a change set. So this is another benefit that you get for using configuration management. It allows you to group together logical changes that you may make to multiple requirements into one solid change set. So let's say response time updated due to failed defect, for example, and we can create that as a change set. And that basically gives me my own isolated area to make some changes within without everyone else seeing it in the project. And I can click into this requirement now, and let's say it needs to be, 40 milliseconds for argument's sake. And we can click away from that, and it saves it into the system. And that's the one change that we've made in this particular example. But I could make changes to several requirements in this module, or requirements that exist in, the wider components. They don't all have to be in the same document view as we're looking at it now. And then once I've made that change and I'm happy with it, I can then choose to deliver that change so everyone else in the project will see that, because this is my own little, this is Matt's version at the minute. There's my own little isolated domain, so it gives me a level of segregation to make multiple updates without any issues. I also then have the option to link it to a work item, so I can link it to the defect that was found within RQM, or a task within RTC that gives me that piece of work to do, or potentially create a new one as well, just to make sure that the change that we're making is required. So let's just find something in here. Regulatory change for argument's sake. So this change now has been linked to that work item in RTC, and we can put in change control here to say, I physically can't deliver a change to this set of requirements unless there's an approved change within RTC, for example. So again, it's optional in terms of what you want to switch on or leave off. But for now, I've created that link, and I'm just going to deliver that change into the stream. Again, it talks me through a little wizard. I just want to deliver the one change for the minute, so I'm going to deliver that back into the basic, and it gives me a side-by-side comparison again, just to show me the differences, but I've just made the change, so I don't need to look back at that. So if we switch back to our basic version of the cruise control, what we'll see is the 40 milliseconds there has been set because I've made that change. We can quickly do a comparison just to double check that, to make sure that they are different now between the two different streams, and I'll step through this wizard slightly quicker now just to highlight it. 2558. And we can see the changes, the differences between the two, 40 milliseconds, 60 milliseconds. So it shows that there as a difference, and because that's something that isn't relevant to or isn't specific to just side-facing radar or just the basic cruise control in this example, I want to deliver that to another stream. So without having me to go into the premium stream and make that change manually, what I can do then is choose to deliver changes to the premium stream from the basic stream, and this is effectively pushing those changes out. And again, we get this same wizard, and we can see there's 120 changes that have been made that are different between the two streams. I don't want to merge them all. I'm going to choose specifically which one I want to add, and I can filter that there to help me find it. The one change is the only thing I'm moving here, and I can deliver that now into the premium adaptive cruise control. And what we'll be able to see here, hopefully, is obviously it's 40 milliseconds in the basic, and then if we switch back to the premium, it is the 40 milliseconds as well. So slightly noddy change. It was one textual thing. In reality, it might have been quicker for me just to make that change in the premium, but you know, if there's multiple requirements across multiple documents, multiple attributes getting changed that need to be done, it's much quicker for me then to merge those changes using that wizard that we've just gone through, rather than just manually key those in, you know, as it might have been for me to do that there. So that's a kind of a simple demo to show the requirement side of it, but you know, we've not really looked at the wider toolkit as part of this webinar series yet, and we will be doing that as part of the later on series, but without going into too much detail, effectively this configuration management covers everything, you know, not just the requirements. So if we are doing verification and validation within our whole toolkit of those requirements, we want to run some tests against them, we want to make sure those tests and requirements are in sync. So what I can do here again is a comparison, and I've switched into the testing domain, and I can do a comparison between my premium and my basic, and select a particular module that I want to, test module that I want to look into. And again, a very simple change, a very simple difference here. One test case is different, and we've got one test script that's different, and I can highlight those changes here. And effectively, you know, if we remember, the premium adaptive cruise had a blind spot monitoring, those side-facing radars that enabled features like blind spot monitoring and keeping you in lane. We can see the test script has got those extra steps that doesn't exist in the basic cruise control. So again, you know, 80% of these test steps are exactly the same. The only difference are these 3 steps that make sure the adaptive cruise control is keeping you in lane and is checking for blind spot monitoring. So it's not just a requirements thing. This covers source code as well as the testing, and where you're using Rhapsody model managers to manage your models. And we can highlight this just a bit easier for you to see. If we open up our blind spot monitoring adaptive cruise control test and scroll down, I think it was steps 6, 7, and 8. Here we go, 7, 8, and 9. Blind spot monitoring and lane keep assist items are checked within the car, and it's checking for blind spot in the mirrors if you've got a car in your blind spot. So those steps are the differences between the basic and the premium. And again, just to reiterate that, it's the same script. Step 1 is still step 1 between the two different streams. but we'll just switch back to the basic now just to highlight that again. Differences are only minor between the different testing that we've got there. I don't want to have to run all the tests. If a test is already passed against a requirement that's not changed, I don't want to have to run that. I just want to run the tests against those that are different. And using a system like this allows me to do that level of rework and relying on the fact that I've already done some of the work without having to rerun everything. So we can see in this basic example, there's no steps that exist for blind spot monitoring. There's the differences that we can see highlighted for us. So very simple kind of demo. We can do baselines and create streams and multiple branches that I've not run into or I've not shown you as part of this demo, but hopefully that kind of shows you some of the power from using a system that allows you to do this variant management, because we can very quickly make a new version, make changes, do comparisons, and then repurpose or move those changes into different domains where it's relevant across the entire life cycle. So not just purely focused on requirements, testing and everything else can be brought into the mix to make sure everything's in sync and in line. So very quick demo. If you do want to go into more detail on that, there's lots more features, and we can look at specifically RTC source code or model manager if you wanted to do that as well. Do get in touch with us, but that's kind of the demo that as I wanted to show it to you. So Carl, I guess, have any more questions come in the meantime, but if anyone else has a question, now would be the time to ask.
Okay, so yeah, as Matt said, we've got the chat window to all panelists or the Q&A. So just to kick things off, John wasn't able to attend today, but he did ask me to. I know he'll be watching this, so he wanted to understand how reporting works with global configurations. So that was an area of interest to him.
Sure. Yeah, good question. So reporting still works with global configurations, and that's not a problem. Previously, if you have used the rational tools for a while, there was something called the data warehouse, which was a database that its purpose was to pull data into it on a regular basis so you could pull off metrics and reports. That doesn't work with global configurations turned on because the amount of volume of data that would get populated into it wouldn't scale. So a new reporting technology was actually created for this version management functionality called Lifecycle Query Engine. So effectively, the data warehouse that you may have used in the past is still there. You can still use it on projects where you've not turned on this version management, but LQE exists for you to report on version managed resources. So when you run the report, it will ask you which version you want to look at and report on, and you can switch those versions at runtime of the report, and it will pull through the relevant metrics for you to show you test results or requirement status or whatever it might be. So yeah, reporting does still work. There are some slight differences in the data source that's used, but you can still pull off metrics and reports. The one thing to add is where you've used project dashboard reports or widgets, if you're familiar with that term, they should still work because they would just pull through the data for the version that you are in once you switch in that top right. But for kind of those report builder type reports you might have produced, that uses the new LQE data source, but the reports you can produce are almost exactly the same.
Okay. Seems like that makes sense to me. Hopefully it does to John when he rewatches. I have another question as well. So great concept with global configurations. The question really is this best to start with a sort of a new project, or could it be applied to an existing project?
Yeah, okay. So both we can accommodate both options. So as when I mentioned this does get turned on, you turn it on a project by project basis. So you may have several projects that you're already in flight with and in progress with, and you don't want to have to, you kind of want to leave those as is. So you could have a new project that's on the horizon that you want to use this on, turn it on at the start, talk about your streaming strategy and how you want to build your components and turn that on and use it specifically. And that is, customers do think that's generally a good thing to do because it gives them that clean slate and they can kind of start from scratch on a new project without too much technical debt. But, if you do have a project that already exists, There may be a new variant that you've got in your head thinking, oh, we've got a new release that we've got to do for a particular website, or a particular product that we want to produce where we know we're going to reuse lots of things. We can turn that on once the project is in flight, and you can kind of do effectively a baseline, so you always know what the project was like when it was created or when it was turned on, and then you can manage that with the project that already exists. So, I mean, you can turn it on for stuff that you're already working on, but, customers do tend to think that, pick a new project and treat that as the clean slate to start to make use of this sort of functionality. And then once they've got to grips with it, they may go back and start to apply that to projects they've already started working on.
Okay, thank you. And I guess a question from me, actually, maybe on behalf of some of the customers on board. I mean, you mentioned two things there, a streaming strategy, and, sort of helping customers decide that. So I mean, can you talk a bit about how we can help customers with that, and in terms of potential training to help adopt global configurations, but at the same time, what streaming strategies you are seeing being used by customers? Sorry, it's probably a double-barreled question, but sort of related.
Sure. Yeah, no, it is. So from a streaming strategy point of view, then obviously customers that look at this, from a software point of view, software releases, is quite a nice fit for how this makes sense. So, if we think about the IBM products, we've got version 6.06.1 is the latest. We've still got customers that are on 6.06 and 6.05 and products that were earlier than that. So, what they might, they need to track those, or we do as IBM, and you will do as well as suppliers for this sort of stuff. We need to maintain what stuff looked like on those past versions. So if a customer does find a particular bug in an earlier release, you can see what the code was, see what the requirements were, see what the tests were that were ran, and then potentially make that change in an earlier release or a previous release. And that's a good example of where you might want to have a fix that you would then apply for the most recent version. And these tools kind of enable you to do that. So that's kind of one of the key streaming strategies, that customers use this for in the software domain, the kind of software releases that they produce. Another conversation we're having with a utilities company in the UK at the minute is around project-based versions management. So they've got projects, a core set of requirements and tests that they have, and then they've got projects that come on and work in parallel. So they want to give a level of isolation to those projects that are working together to make the changes they need to run their projects as they see fit. And they get together as a regular type meetings at once a month or whatever it is, and talk about changes that may be relevant to other projects, and they can share those changes between the different projects. So if you're working that kind of sort of project by project basis, then the system that's a good streaming strategy to think about as well. But particularly with, products and physical products, and where we've got customers that do this sort of stuff, they almost, it would be relatively easy to start to think, right, this version of a car I've got, this is the versions that we need for the infotainment or adaptive cruise control or whatever it might be. So we've looked at those examples as part of the demo, but I've given a couple more examples for, project basis or kind of software release basis type versions or variants. But, every customer is different. So we've got a chap in the UK who is kind of our guru on global configurations, and he's worked with multiple companies to help them roll this out. He's got a whole set of examples of different streaming strategies that exist and how you want to create your components and tag those to make sure they get reused as effectively as possible. And he's delivered that to multiple companies. Quite a large automotive supplier in Germany, I think, was the last one that was delivered to that. So, we've helped customers roll this out, and when we've delivered services to help them do that, you can do it as yourself as a customer, but, we can assist to provide some of those war stories and best practice advice where we've seen it work for the customers as well. So, the examples we've shown might work for you, they might not work for you. If they don't and you're not clear, this is a problem for you, but you're not clear how you might use it, then that's an ideal opportunity for someone from Persistent to come in and assist you do that.
Okay. Good. Thank you, Matt. And I guess I can see Mark has asked a question about reverting back once it's turned on. I guess I'll just ask a question before that. I mean, how does a customer then go and turn on global configuration within Doors Next, for example?
Yeah, sure. So there's a menu item within the project settings that you need admin access to be able to do. I can quickly show you actually while we're on. So if I go into my project settings here, just project area, you'll see over here on the left-hand side this configuration management option. So if it wasn't turned on, you would be using nothing. This radio box will be checked. But effectively, you need to come into here and then turn on enable full configuration management with this radio button there. So that's how you turn it on a project, in a specific project. Before you do that, you need to get a key from IBM, or Persistent can help you get that as well to turn this on. And basically, the reason that we ask you to do that is there are some dependencies that you need in terms of infrastructure to support this, particularly the LQE for reporting that we talked about earlier. So there's some considerations that need to be looked at before you do turn this on. So we just want to make sure that we've had a chat and had a conversation and kind of alluded to some of those, and you're happy with those before you're proceeding. So once you've added that key onto the server, then you'll be able to come into the project and turn that on. And to Mark's question, part of the reason that we get you to generate the key and to turn it on specifically is because it can't, unfortunately, be turned back off. Once it's on, the data gets manipulated in such a way that it's not reversible at the minute. So we do want to make sure that you're happy with what you're going through to turn it on before you actually do that. So
Okay.
another reason to reach out to get some assistance and make sure you're happy with it. But it's very powerful technology, but there are some considerations that you need to be aware of before adopting this. But once it is in flight and everything's working, you can see that how this can save significant time and rework on projects, hopefully.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it all makes sense to me. I think it's been great to see that content, great to see the demonstration. So yeah, I mean, final chance for questions, guys. I can't see anything else in the chat for now. So we'll give it one last opportunity while maybe we flick back to the schedule, Matt, and just talk a bit about what's coming, if we can, very briefly.
We can.
Thank you. So yeah, next in 2 weeks' time, we're talking about industry compliance. So whether you're in the medical device industry, the automotive, aerospace and defence, etc. And then, as Matt says, we are going into talk then about how we deliver and validate these requirements that we've been talking and focusing on within the past few webinars. And then we are looking to extend this series due to demand, and we have a few other topics in sort of discussion at the moment and in planning. So expect to see those advertised within the next couple of weeks. But if there is anything that you would like to see covered, of course we can do that as a sort of a one-on-one meeting with you to talk about your specific requirements. But at the same time, if you think maybe it's something that will be beneficial for your peers, or others within the industries, then please let us know. We're very open to running webinars on different topics, and we'll be delighted to do so to help answer questions about the IBM technology and how it can help address engineering challenges, really. So yeah, as I mentioned, this there will be a link sent out afterwards. Keep an eye out on social media for advertisements for the next webinars, and I guess we can close the call there. It looks like I can see a comment actually from VJ. I can't see that properly. It's not coming through on my end. Okay, I'll have to look into that afterwards. But no, I just wanted to take the time to really thank you all for joining, and yeah, look forward to welcoming you on a future webinar. So we'll close the call there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers. Bye.